Welcome back, everybody. Great to have you with us on the program, This Week in America, website thisweekinamerica.us. As mentioned, talking about the new book, Stump. Before there were SEALs, there was Stump, the Naked Warrior, a World War II hero, a Navy frogman. His real name is Lee Kelly. The book is a historical military biography by Allen Lindsey. Larry is a retired naval officer, Vietnam veteran. Larry did his undergrad studies at Princeton, master's work at Kent State. During his military career, Larry was stationed overseas in Spain, Okinawa, Guam, and Vietnam. Stateside, he had tours of duty in Mississippi, Ohio, Virginia, and California. He served on the worst riding ship in the Navy, a World War II LST, the same ship, by the way, that landed his father at Normandy, and the best riding ship in that same Navy, a modern aircraft carrier. He was also attached to both the Seabees and Marines. Lindsey currently lives in sunny San Diego, California, called America's finest city, and I'm not going to argue with that after shoveling out in Indiana all winter long. Allen Lindsey, our guest on the program. Hi, Larry. Welcome to the program.
Oh, thank you very much. Pleasure to be here.
It is our pleasure to have you with us to talk about a real-life hero. And just set the stage in who he is, and we'll talk about the relationship that you had. But when I mention frogmen, there are probably a lot of people of a different generation that really don't know what we're talking about. Explain what the frogman did at that time.
Well, as a precursor to the SEALs, they were involved with pre-amphibious operations. When the Navy wanted to land somewhere, they would send Navy frogmen in, probably most of the times at night, to scout out the lay of the land and plant charges to destroy, for instance, jumping jacks, which were railroad tracks welded together to tear apart landing craft. And although they weren't combat oriented, they weren't like the SEALs where they were engaged in any physical fighting. They did come under fire many times. They didn't. It was before scuba, so they were only dressed in fins, shorts, and masks. Hence the name Naked Warriors, which was coined by the press back then.
The book is about Lee Kelly. His nickname was Stump. We'll get to why the nickname in a second, but I want to talk about how this whole relationship came about. It's funny how things sort of happen in life. When you're out walking the dog, you see this older gentleman who's sitting out in the front lawn. He's in a fold-up chair, and he yells out at you, "Hey, big guy." And that really was a meeting that turned your life around, and you spent 10 years with him, basically almost every day telling stories.
Oh, yes. It became I look forward to breaking the day. I'd go sit on his porch, and he was a very gregarious individual. Loved to talk, and that was good because I loved to listen. And it took him a while to open up because, like my father, he very seldom he was kind of reticent about talking about his experiences in the war. But since we were sort of kind of brothers in arms.
Right.
Me in Vietnam, he in World War II, we sort of had a lot of things in common. And he told me some fascinating stories, like being on the beach in the Philippines, waiting for MacArthur to arrive when he made his famous "I shall return" landing. Yes, and we just, we would go to dinner every Monday.
And the waitress would think it's like dad and son coming in every week.
Hey, that's true. I don't know whether that was an insult to him because I'm an ugly cuss, but he was a flirtatious sort, and he would just always wink and say, "Nah, that's just my little brother," even though I was about a full head taller than he was.
Yeah, and that's where the nickname comes from. The book is called Stump. Our guest on the program is the author Allen Lindsey. His website is Allen Lindsey, Allen with an E, Lindsey with the E.com. The book's available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble. And, of course, if you go to our website, thisweekinamerica.us, you can link on directly to Larry's website to get information on the book Stump. And he was called Stump basically why? This is a short guy, but he was a mighty guy.
Oh, yeah. He played hockey. He had his... like every kid who plays hockey, he had six stitches in his chin. He had his orbital socket broken with a hockey puck. He was also a champion swimmer. But he was, if he stretched his neck, he could maybe reach 5'6". And his two buddies in the war, Hillbilly and Frenchie, were 6'2", almost my size, and between they were two tall timbers between a stump when they when they when they took a picture of him. So his nickname stuck with him all through the war. Not so much after the war, but that's why I called it Stump.
And that's,
with an exclamation point.
Well, yeah, and again, that's the name of the book. It's very easy to remember. It's an excellent read. One of the reviews, a gentleman picked it up, was going to read a couple of chapters, and suddenly, because he couldn't put it down, the book is over, and he's waiting for the next one to come out, and we'll talk about whether or not Larry's going to be working on the next one here a little bit later on in the program. Larry Allen Lindsey, our guest in the program, his website, LarryAllenLindsey.com. The book's available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and information link on directly by going to our website, thisweekinamerica.us. Let's talk about the background with Stump, with Lee. He's 17 years old, like many people of that generation, motivated by the attack on Pearl Harbor. And you say his goal basically was to kill as many of the enemy as possible. So he goes out when he's thinking about joining the Marine Corps. That's exactly what he was planning on doing when he decided to enlist.
Oh, yes. His best friend in high school came home after a boot leave, and he was dressed in his Marine blues, and he cut such a swath through town that Lee definitely wanted to become a leatherneck. And he only joined the Navy because when he went down to enlist, there was such a long line in the Marines, and he got spotted by a recruiter who knew his target well and convinced him that, my lad, the Navy has a great program for those of you who can swim well. It's called Frogman, and he was enticed to join the Navy. Went to school here in San Diego for a couple months, then was shipped overseas, to Hawaii first at Hilo, where he learned boat training, and then went to the South Seas for the duration of the war.
You mentioned before the two close friends that he had, and within a very short period of time, he lost both of those. Talk about the loss of the first one, the impact that had on him, and then we'll talk about the second, which was really devastating for him. Had him second guessing what he was doing there.
Well, Hillbilly, who was from the West Virginia, Hillbilly Parsons, he was blown up at Tacloban when a charge detonated prematurely, so much so that they never recovered the body, just pieces of it. And since Lee was born to vaudevillian parents who turned out to be real bounders, they were spendthrift, and they spent it all the time, all their time performing and whatnot. In fact, Lee had to sing for his supper for the first 3 years of his life.
Literally had to sing for his supper.
Right. He had a little costume, and his father would dress up in blackface and play the clarinet and tell jokes. And his mother, who was a Mary Pickford lookalike, played drums and hoofed in the chorus. And they never really should have had a child because they were always gone, and they were always partying and spent all their money on booze and cars. And it was so bad, in fact, that when Lee returned from overseas, he was sending savings bonds home so that he could kickstart his civilian life, and his father spent them all. And his mother claimed that he had been killed overseas so that she was a Gold Star mother and got all the attention.
Suddenly, she's saying it's a miracle, and he's like, You knew that I wasn't dead, and Dad is like, I thought you sent the savings bonds for me. We were going through some rough times back here.
Yeah.
So he comes back, and his belief system is shattered anyway from what he's seen and what he's gone through. And he returns, and he's met with a dad that's taken the savings bonds that he sent to give him a start in the civilian life. Those are gone. Mom is telling everybody, poor me, my son died in the war. So he has to deal with that. Let's talk about the loss of the second friend, the Three Musketeers, as he liked to refer to them. That happened, and that really had him second guessing what it was he was doing. I mean, at this point, his life is full of blood and dying.
Oh, yes. Frenchie, he was from the Atchafalaya swamps in southern Louisiana. He was, while they were trying to free up Manila Bay after the 2 weeks of bombardment by the Allies, he was trapped in a Japanese patrol boat. And when the thing shifted, he got himself hooked on a piece of metal. And trying to extricate himself, he actually tore his femoral artery and bled out. At the time, they were never on the same team together because I don't know if you remember the Sullivan brothers in World War II.
Yes.
All 5 of them perished, and the Navy issued an edict that any relatives or real good friends wouldn't be on the same team. So Frenchie was a UDT, and Hillbilly and Stump were both what's aquatic gophers, which handled the gear back and forth between planning and discharges, and they were on different 4-man teams. So while Frenchie was in Manila Bay, Stump was off a corregidor retrieving bodies. That the Navy had made a horrendous mistake there by misjudging the tides or miscalculating the groundswell, and they had deposited whole bunches of Marines in 10 feet of water, and they also dropped paratroopers that were met by an incredible amount of unexpected fire. So all these bodies were floating in the water, and Lee was charged, he and his team, pulling these loaded bodies out of the water. He said it was one of the most challenging and discouraging things he ever did in the war. While he was doing that, his buddy Frenchie drowned in Manila Bay. He didn't learn about it until 3 days later. So it was a very trying time, and he thought a couple times about ending it because, at that point in time, they were like his big brother that he never had. He was closer to the Frenchie and Hillbilly than he ever was to his mother and father.
Yeah, he referred to them as like my left arm and my right arm, and suddenly those are gone. You're listening to This Week in America. Our guest on the program is Larry Allen Lindsey. He's the author of the book Stump. Before there were SEALs, there was Stump, the Naked Warrior. The book is simply called Stump. It's available all across the country. Information at Larry's website, LarryAllenLindsey.com. And, of course, you can get information by going on to our website, thisweekinamerica.us, and linking on directly to Larry's website. Stump, and this is a World War II hero, Navy frogman. Lee Kelly, his real name. The book is a historical military biography. In the book, he's there for like the major kamikaze attack of the war, and was there that he suffered some very severe burns at that time.
Yes. Well, it was on the Okinawa was one of the worst, most devastating battles the Navy fought in World War II. In fact, they lost more people at Okinawa than any other engagement in the war. At the time, Okinawa was considered the bastard cousins of Japan, and they were always looked down by the mainland Japanese. However, they were the last stand for the Japanese, because if Americans took Okinawa, then the nightly raids over Tokyo and any other of the cities on mainland Japan would increase fourfold. So they put up a hellacious defense, not so much on the landing. Lee conducted the amphibious scouting before the landing, and there was very little resistance. So the fighting actually took place much farther inland. But while he was on the troop ships, after he made the landing, and the landing went off with just a few mortar attempts, they suffered a typhoon. Now, they had a couple kamikaze attacks before then, and when the typhoon hit, the island was just devastated. So they went out to sea. When they came back in, then the biggest kamikaze attack of the war occurred on April 6, 1945. And as a frogman on one of those troop ships, they were given secondary positions. They weren't part of the crew.
Right.
And his was a backup spotter and a gun loader. Well, during the attack, one of the loaders was not decapitated, but incapacitated, and he had to take over. And while he was loading shells, several kamikazes came that close to taking him out. And while he was standing in the gun tub, a 40 millimeter shell is pretty heavy. And when the casings come out, they're just scorching hot. And since he wasn't exactly in the proper gear at the time, his pant legs were burned off, and he suffered second degree and some third degree burns on his legs. So.
The book we're talking about is called Stump. It's available, as I say, all across the country, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and at Larry's website, Larry Allen Lindsey, the author. His website is larryallenlindsey.com. Thisweekinamerica.us will take you directly to Larry's website, get information, and able to order the book there as well. It's interesting, the great story in the book, he's in Guam, and what a 3-star admiral comes up to Lee and asks him his thoughts on landing for the invasion of Japan, and he wasn't being politically correct with his answer, was he? If you ask Lee a question, he's going to give you an honest answer.
Oh yeah, he was never shy about anything. In fact, his many of the conversations we had, he always said, well, opinions are like
yes,
a-holes. Everybody has one. But it was the first time he'd seen an admiral, and he actually got called to this Quonset hut on Guam. Guam was the place where they were trying to figure out where they were going to have to invade mainland Japan. And nobody wanted to do it, but they had to plan for it. So after Okinawa, he went to Guam, and as he was waiting there, and he for most of the time he just sort of sat around and played cards, but he received a call from his superior officer that this admiral and a whole host of full birds wanted to talk to him. And when he got there in this Quonset hut, there was this huge relief map about 16 feet long, 2 feet high, and 5 feet wide. And it was of Yokosuka, which was a projected landing site for the Allies. And the admiral asked him first, was he a frogman, and had he had experience in this? And he said, yes, sir, I was. And he said, well, what do you think of this? And well, then Lee told him exactly where he thought that the landing should be, and the admiral was impressed because it had taken his people about 2 days to figure out the same spot. And they said, well, what's going to happen? He says, what do we need to do? He says, well, in the first place, Admiral, we're going to lose a lot of people here. And he says, if you think it's going to be easy, you got another thing coming. Then he explained what could possibly transpire, and how Yokosuka was much worse than Normandy. And he told him that because he was a avid reader, and he knew about what happened at Normandy. He says, this is going to be 10 times worse, and it's going to cost you 10 times as many people. And the admiral said, well, how can you be sure? Well, he pointed out the fact that given all the lay of the land, they'd have just cut everybody to pieces. And he said, I'm going to have to go in first, and there's no way in hell I'm going to come out of there alive.
Yeah, so, he was very graphic in his answer.
Oh, yes. He says, when he told me, he said, it's going to cost you 1 million American lives to march into Tokyo, and one of those lives is going to be mine. When you tell a 3-star admiral that, and you're only a second class, it takes some guts.
Yes, it does. It's just one of the many stories you'll find and enjoy in the book Stump, the story of Lee Kelly, who came back, went to Akron University, got a degree, became active with the space program with the General Dynamics, and died in November 6th of 2013. And our guest in the program, Larry Allen Lindsey, did the eulogy. Talk about what it was like, what it is like not to have him. I'm sure as you're still out walking, you look around to see if Stump's around to talk about his stories from the war.
He was such a fixture, and everybody in the complex here knew Lee. I still walk my dog by that place, and every time I go by, I give a little salute, and here's to you, Lee. He was probably my best friend, and every day I miss him a little bit, and I think about him, and there's so many things, like he had so many opinions. I can't begin to tell you. I'm sure this is a G-rated program, and what he thought about our current political situation was sometimes
I can
very
only
strange.
imagine to have been there and to listen to Lee talk about his impression about what was going on in Washington now. It is a fascinating book. I'd mentioned that one of the reviews is like, can't wait for the second. Are you working on another book?
Yes, I am. A little background. I started off this book when my father died. A year after my father died, I ran across this report that about what he had done in World War II, and he never talked about World War II. And I found out that on April 6th, the same day that Lee was at Okinawa helping fight the kamikazes, he single-handedly was in charge. Resulted in getting 2,000 Nazis to surrender at the German town of Rinteln.
Wow.
And I thought, wow, that's kind of interesting. And so I started digging things. And my
And
father-in-law...
he never talked about it then, right?
Never. It was... Never came across. Because he just... It was kind of funny because he always said... When I went to off to Vietnam, he was really ticked. He said, I didn't sludge across Western Europe for 3 years to have my number one son yanked off to another war. He was royally pissed. Excuse my French.
Yes.
So I started to look into that and see what he did. He landed at Normandy with Patton and went across Europe. And so I thought, well, my father-in-law also was in World War II, and he never talked about it. So I started digging about him, and lo and behold, on April 6th, 1945, he was flying a Hellcat at Okinawa.
Wow.
So, while Lee was downstairs shooting upwards, my father-in-law, Dan Carmichael, was upstairs shooting downstairs.
Yes.
And so I thought, well, that's kind of strange, the one day in a war. So I started writing a book along those lines. And then Lee got sick. He developed pancreatic cancer, as did my father. And I started taking care of him in his last few days. And as he got worse and worse, I decided, well, Lee deserves a standalone book. So I pulled his portion of it out and titled it Stump. So I have the second portion, which is I'm going to call Danny Boy and the Turk, about my father and my father-in-law on two different theaters of the war.
And it's amazing, all on April 6th. I am looking forward to, that is so strange. I wish you the best with that book, and we will stay in touch and love to have you come back on the program to talk about that. The book that is finished, doing very, very well reviewed, including a review from former Senator Bill Bradley. The book is called Stump. The author is Larry Allen Lindsey. His website is LarryAllenLindsey.com. Allen and Lindsey, both spelled with E's. The book's available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and you can go to our website, thisweekinamerica.us, and link on directly to Larry's website. Larry, an excellent job on the book, a great story. I loved having the opportunity to read it and have you on the program. Thank you for being with us. We'll stay in touch and have you back to talk about book number 2.
Thank you very much, sir. You have a great day.
You as well. You're listening to This Week in America, website thisweekinamerica.us.